Welcome back to Dark Nexus. My name is Rob. I am the game master for this project, and we've got our 4 players with us.
I'm Katie.
I'm Paul.
I'm Robert. And I'm Johnny.
We are getting ready to start recording Act 4 of this podcast, the 4th book of the Strange Eons Adventure Path. And it's time once again to recap our story thus far. This, of course, gets harder and harder to do the further along we get into the story. So this is probably going to be most useful as a refresher for longtime listeners. If you're just finding us now, I strongly encourage you to start back from the beginning and enjoy the ride. But if that's not your plan, hopefully this will give you some setup and context for what you are about to listen to. As always, if you've ever got questions about a name or a reference that comes up, please check out the wiki on our website, darknexuspodcast.com. It is so big at this point, y'all. In the last recap, I bragged that there were entries for 150 NPCs at that time. We nearly doubled that number by the end of Act 3.
Whoa.
As I think a byproduct of so many trips to the Dreamlands. And as always, if you've made it with us this far on the journey and you have not yet done so, please consider becoming a patron of the show. $5 or $10 a month on Patreon is so huge for a tiny outfit like ours, or if you prefer, you can easily make a one-time donation of any amount, large or small, through our Ko-fi page. Links to both are at the site. Alrighty, let's recap. I assume this goes without saying, but do be aware that spoilers lie ahead, obviously. Okay, here is our story in 5 sentences. 4 strangers woke up with no memories in the basement of Briarstone Asylum.
Over the following months, they learned that they were, in fact, not strangers, but in their former lives they had been allies and members of a cult engaged in terrible acts of evil and depravity.
By walking first through the streets of their former hometown and then by retracing their own travels through another dimension, they regained their memories, came to understand the traumas that had shaped their former lives, and have just become whatever passes for whole for the first time since we've known them.
But they are infected with the seed of a monstrous great old one. A piece of Jamandor grows inside each of their brains.
And they may be the only people in the world who can stop their former ally, Count Lowls, from completing the apocalyptic scheme that they helped him to put into motion.
And that's all you need to know. We'll see you next week. We're out. Yes. Of course, there's a ton more detail. We can't capture it all here, but let's hit some highlights. Here is a high-level breakdown of each of our first 3 acts. Act 1 was a tale of survival horror, where our protagonists spent 11 days trapped in a crumbling asylum stuck halfway between the real world and the dimension of dreams. While working to find a way out and to save a group of other survivors, they learned that they had been monsters in their previous lives, and that they had been left at the asylum in a near catatonic state by their former employer, Hazerton Pragmus Lowls IV. They eventually escaped and made their way to the nearby town of Thrushmoor. Act 2 was a paranoid thriller where our protagonists spent just over a week in their former home of Thrushmoor, working to save the populace from the machinations of a cult of Hastur, the King in Yellow. The cult was trying to transpose or merge or send the town to Carcosa, the alien city in which Hastur is imprisoned. While exploring Thrushmoor, our characters learned more about who they had been before their memories were erased, and they learned more about Lowls, his nature, his past, and some hints at his future plans. Knowing he was heading south to the city of Casimir, they hopped aboard the Sullen Starling and took off in pursuit. And Act 3 was a trippy insanity freak show, where our protagonists spent several months pursuing Lowls in the real world by day and retracing their former travels through the dimension of dreams by night. In the end, they reached a being known as the Mad Poet in his little gray hut at the end of the dreaming, where they recovered their memories and learned Lowls's plan. However, their dreaming minds became untethered from reality, and they ended up sleeping away several months before finally awakening. Now, let's talk about our characters. We'll put them into a few different buckets here. Our 4 main protagonists, our backup buddies, and finally, key NPCs, or non-player characters. Let's start with the main 4. First,
Dora is an Azimar psychic. In her original life, she was forced, as a child, into a situation where she had to kill her father in order to try to save her mother's life. In that terrifying moment, she needed to become someone capable of such an act. So she imprisoned everything about herself in a lockbox in her mind and became Anathema.
Anathema was captured by the terrible denizen of Leng, Wiralai, aka the Stranger, and forced into a life of slavery and abuse.
Anathema, or Tima, was forced to kill again as an adolescent when she used a summoned devil to murder an evil wizard. With blood on her hands, surrounded by few choices and a life of darkness, drugged out of her mind, she eventually became a monster.
She wound up in the home of Hazerton Lowles, where she served as his chief researcher.
Tima was a wizard, a shut-in, and a devoted servant to Hasta, the King in Yellow, and to the inmost blot, Jamandor. She served as a driving force in helping Lowles reach the Mad Poet.
Lowles was desperately searching for the location of the lost city of Neruzavin, believing it to be the place where Jamandor slumbers. And the Mad Poet was the only person who could tell him how to find its location. Well, the Mad Poet did tell Lowles what he wanted to know, but only after Lowles sacrificed Tima's memories and life experiences to him. In the Dreamlands, she ceased to exist. And in the real world, she became an empty, near catatonic shell, technically alive, but devoid of life.
This should have been the end of her story.
However,
on the 24th of Lamartian in the year 4718, she was awakened.
We don't know how, and we don't know why, not yet, but she was given a second chance, an alternate life. A life that didn't end in the Mad Poet's oasis, but somehow carried on in that asylum in the real world. Well, an asylum that, at that particular moment, was caught halfway between the real world and the dimension of dreams, thanks to a botched occult ritual.
In this second life, the life we have been playing out in our story, Dora was given a clean slate. She is Dora. She is a psychic. She is patient and kind and capable of forgiveness. She is strong and determined, but no longer ruthless or depraved. Yet, the echo of her decades spent as Tima persisted, and the psychic shadow of that personality haunted her. It even overtook her at times. At least, that has been true up until now.
We'll find out what comes next, now that her memories and life experience have been integrated. Next.
Grip is a half-orc brawler. In his original life, his name was Grok Riptusk, and he was forced as a child into a situation where he murdered his own brother and lost his entire tribe.
Riptusk was captured by Wiralai and forced into a life of slavery and abuse.
He was forced to kill again when he was an adolescent. He tortured and sacrificed a group of gnolls in order to sell his soul to Nergal, the god of senseless warfare. With blood on his hands, surrounded by few choices and a life of darkness, he eventually became a monster.
He wound up in the home of Hazerton Lowles, where he served as his chief enforcer.
Riptusk was a barbarian and fighter, and a devoted servant to Hastur, the King in Yellow. He led the troops in the battles they faced on the road to the Mad Poet.
But Riptusk's memories and life experiences were also sacrificed at the Oasis, just as Tima's had been. And in the Dreamlands, he ceased to exist. In the real world, he became an empty shell.
This should have been the end of his story.
However,
on the 24th of Lamartian, about 5 months ago now, he was awakened.
We don't know how, and we don't know why, but he was given a second life, a clean slate.
In this second life, he is Grip. He is a brawler. He is just as deadly as he had been before, but a capacity for personal growth and discipline has opened to him, and he's been seeking to distance himself from a monster he was before.
Next.
Vic is a human investigator and gunslinger. In his original life, he had multiple names and identities, but he was born as Victor Zolotov. He was manipulated as a child into a situation where he burned down an entire orphanage filled with children.
Victor became Roni and was captured by Wiralai, forced into a life of slavery and abuse.
He was forced to kill again when he was an adolescent during a failed escape attempt from the fortress of a woman named Biting Lash. With blood on his hands, surrounded by few choices and a life of darkness, he eventually became a monster.
He wound up in the home of Hazardton Lowles, where he handled the stealth operations and murders.
Roni, or the Triangle Man, was a rogue and assassin, and a devoted servant to Hastur, the King in Yellow.
But his memories and life experiences were also sacrificed at the Oasis.
And this should have been the end of his story.
However,
On the 24th of Lamashon, he was awakened.
he was given a second life.
But not necessarily a clean slate. In this new life, he also took on multiple names and identities, but in the end, he became Vic. He's an investigator and gunslinger. He's just as cunning and stealthy as he had been before, but he is no longer the sociopath he had once become, and he feels deep responsibility for the actions he took in his previous life.
Among the original four was Dora's son Ray, whose life was marked by tragedy. Both lives, in fact. He'd been born into the midst of all of this, unwanted and unloved, and was tricked into murdering his own sister when they were both children. He became a priest of Zon Kuthan, the god of torture, in his first life, but was embraced by the goddess Shaylin in his second life. He was assassinated a scant 2 weeks into his new life, but his spirit has not yet passed on to whatever afterlife awaits him, and his shadow still hangs over our story. Finally, we have
Dabwick, a halfling urban druid.
Their story is quite different from those of Dora, Vic, and Grip, as they weren't entangled in this mess until quite recently.
Dabwick was abandoned by their parents at an orphanage in the great city of Casimir. They were kidnapped as a baby and eventually raised in the sewers by a dire possum. They found their way to the world above and made a life for themselves, working to help the great organism of the city find harmony between the needs of the people, the flora, and the fauna.
Dabwick's adult life had been, if not exactly idyllic, at least fulfilling and balanced, with the exception of two major events. Number one,
in their early days working in pest control, Dabwick visited the home of a great philanthropist, Myacnean Mun, where they first laid eyes on a representation of Hastur's city of Carcosa. They lost their three best friends and some of their memories, and this adventure left a mark on their life and their choices that they had not recognized until very recently.
And number two,
last summer, Dabwick's best friend Skywyn Freeling encouraged, perhaps pressured, Dabwick to join her on a river journey north to Thrushmoor.
Skywyn had been encouraged, or perhaps pressured, into this by her friend J-Dove. The reasons behind this had been opaque for some time, but we eventually learned that J-Dove had been given what she processed as oracular visions from the goddess Desna, that Dabwick could be instrumental in helping recover her long-lost husband Chester, which turned out to be true.
But regardless of whether or not this was all due to Desna's direct intervention, Dabwick and Skywyn were left feeling manipulated and used.
And of course, it is entirely because Dabwick was in Thrushmoor when they were that they, like the rest of the party, are now carriers of the seed of Jamandor in their brain folds. That's our four main characters in brief. Now let's hit who I call the backup buddies. These are the characters our players have built to exist in and flesh out our world, and who would step up if and when we experience another death in the main party.
Barnabas is a Kitsune skald. He grew up near the World Wound and lost his pack to treachery at the hands of demonic cultists at a very early age. He was later seeded by Jamandor and spent a number of years amongst a well-intentioned but ultimately problematic cult that was trying to help keep the Great Old One asleep. He found his way to Briarstone Asylum where a steady diet of drugs helped keep his infection at bay for a number of years. After the disaster at the asylum, he was rescued and recovered by the party. He joined their travel for months and eventually sacrificed his memories and life experiences at the Mad Poets Oasis in order to help the party learn how to find Neruzavin. He's effectively out of play now, and we don't yet know who will be replacing him.
Stanhope Nixon is a human guiding blade swashbuckler. He'd been entangled with Grip and Vic in their former lives as Rip Tusk and the Triangle Man, although he often thinks of Rip Tusk as the constable still, running errands and roughing people up in Thrushmore on their orders for several years. He had the super bright idea to disguise himself and effectively stow away aboard the Sullen Starling and found himself caught up in the ongoing story. Though something of a challenging personality to deal with at times, he eventually proved himself to be an invaluable asset in a fight and managed to smooth over many of the tenuous relationships he had developed on board.
Stasi Kovacevic is a human inquisitor and knife master rogue. She grew up in the capital of Ustalov and found her way into the service of the Church of Pharasma, where she met and fell in love with a priestess named Winter. She found herself entangled in this story after traveling with Winter to Thrushmore just before everything kicked off. Following Winter's death in Act 1 and all that she experienced in Act 2, Stasi was left uncertain of her life's direction, but decided to travel with the party, hoping to find purpose and meaning on the road. However, because of her status as someone not seated by Jamandor, Stasi found herself shut out of all significant conversations amongst the group in Act 3 and was left playing a thankless role as nurse and guardian while the rest of the team adventured and pursued their epic quest.
Now, as I mentioned, the main PCs, as we begin Act 4, are just waking up from around 2 months asleep after their visit to the Mad Poets Oasis, and we don't yet know Stanhope and Stasi's current status. All we've heard so far is they're all gone. Whatever that means. Finally,
Neb. Neb is a rat-folk witch. We don't know a ton about their backstory yet, but we do know they have been following their giant flea familiar, Ulf, on a long journey to the south. At first it seemed that Ulf might have been tracking the main PCs, but perhaps their path just happened to coincidentally match theirs for a time. Ulf is marked with the unholy symbol of Jamandor, though Neb doesn't recognize its significance. Witches don't always know where their powers come from. And we learned at the very end of Act 3 that Ulf either knows where Neruzavin is or has some means of finding it, and that Werelai plans to use Ulf to find the lost city for herself.
after the party last saw Neb in Razmarin in Chapter 115,
Wow.
their paths have not since crossed, and we aren't certain where Neb and Ulf can be found currently. That's the backup buddies in brief. Now, the key NPCs that we're aware of. For the moment, I think we're mostly focused on 4 people. Hazardton Lowles, Myacnean Mun, Werelai, and the prisoner. Hazardton Pragmus Lowles IV had once been an unimpressive, self-obsessed, failed writer, failed scholar, and failed big shot who, purely because of his gargantuan ego and his parents' wealth, has somehow manifested his role at the heart of what is now a hugely monumental situation. And we now know what he plans to do. He is going to Casimir to pick up his ally, Myacnean Mun, who apparently knows where the Necronomicon can be found. He will then use the Necronomicon to find Neruzavin, and at Neruzavin he will take Jamandor physically into his body, and use the power of the Great Old One to sacrifice Golarion and free Hastur from his prison in Carcosa. The specific hows of that last step are currently unknown, but it seems as though between the visions Jamandor has given him and the contents of the Necronomicon, he stands a chance of making it happen. We also learned something else about Lowles at the end of Act 3, and it has to do with this shard of his soul that we knew as YK. When YK sacrificed himself by returning to the Oasis, he left the Lowles of the real world deprived of certain vital parts of his soul. The Lols of the real world is now a vessel, devoid of love, allyship, companionship, sympathy, or sorrow. It's hard to say exactly how that will present itself, but knowing that your big bad had previously been a soft, kind of pathetic, overly sensitive twit who could be easily manipulated by his mother, by Mun, etc., it may be concerning to know that the man who had been behaving monstrously may now actually be a monster. Yet still, YK seemed to think that this might give you some small advantage. Second, we have Myacnean Mun, Lol's old chum from university, Tima's former lover, and the supposed great philanthropist of Casimir. We don't know too much about him, except that he is wildly brilliant, a master alchemist, a depraved sadist, and a charming, cunning rogue capable of deceiving everyone around him. The original party knows he was responsible for kidnapping and torturing people in Rosenport during his college years, and for manufacturing the drugs that helped turn them into the monsters they became. Dabwick knows of them as a kindly, if somewhat reclusive, servant of the people and worker of wonders for the Imperial Navy of Taldor. Next, we have Weiralai, the Stranger. This figure that has haunted Dora, Grip, and Vic's lives since before they were born. She is the denizen of Lang who was tortured and seemingly killed by Dora's father, Grip's grandfather, and Vic's uncle nearly 60 years ago. She then took her vengeance on their whole lines and is largely responsible for the paths their lives took the first time around. The party sent her back to Lang in Act 2, but we know she returned to the waking world in Act 3, somehow superpowered by Haster, and that she's hell-bent on reaching Neruzavin and ensuring that Lols sees his plan through. At least that's what it seems like. She's such an alien being that understanding her and her exact motivations can be difficult. And finally, speaking of alien, we have who I've been calling the Prisoner. Talk about your long game here. This is an entity that has been trying to contact Dora, Grip, and Vic telepathically since the beginning of our entire story. What do we know? Almost nothing! It's alien in nature somehow. It's capable of long-distance telepathy. It had a brief window back in Act 1 where it could almost make contact with the 4 original PCs. But then once they destroyed the bubble of dreams that the Onirigens were creating, the connection was briefly cut. It began to return more and more strongly the more trips our PCs made to the Dreamlands, until finally, after Dora, Grip, and Vic's memories were restored, it broke back through. It is, or it looks like, or it is inside of, ? An old Kelishite woman currently being held prisoner in Biting Lash's stronghold in Okano. And she has begged Dora, Grip, and Vic to save her. Those are the 4 main NPCs we've got our eyes on, or out for right now, but there are other names we're aware of course. Chief among them,
Skywind Freeling and the crew of the Sullen Starling.
The aforementioned Biting Lash, a terrifying mutant gnoll slaver that held Roni and Riptusk for years, currently holding the prisoner at her stronghold, Blossoming Thorn.
J-Dove and Chester Bindley, our star-crossed lovers. Chester had slept for a decade before the party helped his consciousness escape the Dreamlands.
While Hadrana of the Stardust Augurs cared for his sleeping body,
J-Dove never gave up her search for him.
Now, Dabwick has just learned that the couple has been caring for them while they slept the past 2 months.
and Hadrana had left a portrait of herself with Dora through which she could magically communicate.
Senator Emilio Daldemain of Galt, who had promised to send a reward for his rescue in the party's name to the Vault of Abadar in Casimir.
There's a mercenary outfit we're aware of, 7 deadly combatants led by a former gladiator named Thala of House Cato. We found their names on a list back in Iris Hill, and it seemed like they would be hooking up with Lols and or Mun when they hit the Inner Sea, which they have.
Twain, the twisted 3-armed Darrow alchemist, and her lieutenant Althiel, a mesmerist in charge of a kidnapping ring below the streets of Casimir. Dabwick ran afoul of Elthiel a few years back while helping a local detective with a missing persons case.
And let's not forget Mother Ariadne, the Briarstone Witch, a woman who vanished along with everyone else in Thrushmore over 700 years ago when her occult ritual seemingly failed. Yet, perhaps, at least according to the Mad Poet, she didn't fail?
We've been throwing her name around for years now. Who can say when she'll finally enter the spotlight? All right, those are the highlights. Now, when we pick up, here's where we're at.
We're all seeded by Jamandor.
And we're sharing its dreams.
In Act 2, that meant we experienced glimpses into its dreams, sharing visions from its billions of years of existence.
In Act 3, that meant it looked into our dreams, sharing visions of key moments in our growth and development.
What'll it be in Act 4? Nobody knows, including me. I can't wait to find out what happens, you all.
We're finally in Casimir. Dabwick has just woken up in their little apartment in the Greyguard's Shadow neighborhood, where they have been taken care of by J-Dove and Chester.
Vic, Grip, and Dora are there too, and are about to wake up.
Barnabas is there too, but there's nothing left inside of him.
We don't yet know what's happened to Stasi and Stanhope.
Or the crew of the Starling.
And we have no clue where Neb and Ulf are.
We know Lowles is heading to Neruzavan.
And we know he finally knows how to find out where it lies.
Its location is contained in the dread pages of the Necronomicon.
And Mun knows how to find that.
So, of course, it's probably just a simple matter of getting to the Necronomicon first and stopping them from reading it, right?
Yep.
Right? Right?
Exactly.
Except, of course, they've had 2 months while we slept to do who knows what.
There is so much backstory for all of your various characters that we haven't had time to refresh here. But in terms of things that might have relevance in the days to come...
When Dora recovered her memories and came to understand the relationship between herself and Anathema, at least one mystery was not explained. The little note in Dora's hand that she found tucked inside a violin in Chapter 2. For Eric, don't forget. She still has no memory of writing it. Or of knowing anyone named Eric.
Way back in Act 1, young Maeve told Ray that she had seen him as a glowing angelic being before the events of this campaign ever began. Nobody has recovered any memories that would even remotely explain that.
Vic, in both of his lives, experienced extended periods of time spent in the Dreamlands, including one trip that lasted nearly 2 decades, where he took his brother's name and fathered a daughter he named after his mother.
And at the end of Act 3, the Mad Poet cruelly granted Vic his air quotes wish of seeing Katerina kept safe from Wirelai. There was, of course, a catch. And the catch was that he could never see her again, never check on her welfare, or even speak her name aloud.
And of course, there is the little matter of Grip having bound his soul to the demon Nergal back when he was Riptusk. It seems like the alteration of his tattoos, his years in a haze of drugs, his worship of Haster, his later memory and experience wipe, or some combination, had helped keep him hidden from the eyes of the Shining Scourge. For a time.
I'm sure that storyline is over and done with. Sure, put to bed.
And, of course, Dabwick's friends Sam, Chet, and Aliana were last seen being sucked into a painting of Carcosa in Mun's house.
And that's the end of what I have prepared as a recap. Did I leave any significant events out that you all wanted to bring up or touch back in on your own?
We all went a little crazy in there.
Yeah, there was a lot of insanity.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a pretty traumatic chunk of months for everybody involved. And I think it's also like the bouncing up and down, too.
Yeah. Like, you're good, you're bad, you're good, you're bad.
And like magic to help, people to help, and then deep dives into a whole new madness.
And in those cases, actually having time to heal
Right.
those madnesses,
We're not gonna
which
have
we
any
will
more.
not necessarily have in
Ever
the
again,
future.
maybe?
Yeah.
I will say, though, that hearing about the other party's experience and how they never bothered dealing with their sanity and they just kept letting it pile on makes me feel pretty good about the time we spent taking care of ourselves in order to sustain the quest.
Yeah, because it led them to ultimately a choice of suicide, effectively, really.
Yeah.
It broke them all. It just broke them all.
Yeah. At those saddest moments during that recap was when it was like Grip didn't even show up.
Yeah.
You know, like they just didn't. They wouldn't.
Right.
Didn't
He
care.
was
about
just high.
anything.
He didn't give a shit.
Yeah. No sunk cost fallacy. They just were like, whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
So sad.
So then, other check-ins that we do at this point in our game. Let's, so the alignment conversation, I think like last time, let's save it for our leveling talk, like we did last book. Does that sound good to everybody? Mm-hmm. Checking in on our house rules and agreements, the sanity system, it should be much calmer this particular book. And we've talked both off mic and I think on a little bit about how stopping for weeks of recovery just really won't be a thing anymore. So I think we're cool with keeping it going for now. Everybody feel like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I do want to ask about the madness system. Are we still specifically working to not necessarily have the same madnesses?
I think we need to take that on a
Case by
circumstantial
case,
basis.
okay.
I feel like we've now gotten to the point where every time one of you gets one, you all have a pretty strong idea about what it does to you. You
And
know
then you-
before I
and
even
then
get
you
an
slot
idea.
it in.
And then I will grab Crunch, and maybe I might grab Crunch from a different one just to
Yeah.
shake things up. But I think the most important thing I feel like we've found for purposes of this exercise is
That it's driven by what happened.
yeah, and that you are connected to what happens to your character. Once in a blue moon, I might say, no, I think it's this. And you can say, cool, or you can say, I really want to push back. But, I think using the system itself so far, has been working. But
Punishing,
it's going to
but,
get
yeah.
harder and harder as we go along.
Did our thresholds? That's the one thing on my character sheet I didn't check is if when we got our boon from the Mad Poet, if our
Yes.
thresholds went up. Okay.
Sanity score for everybody except for Grip.
Yeah.
Sanity
Sorry, buddy.
scores and thresholds went up for everybody.
Is that because mine was a physical stat?
Yeah.
That tracks.
Yep.
That tracks.
Yeah, I have it in front of me. So Dabs and Dora's threshold is now 6. So it takes taking 6 points of damage with one single instance to even get a lesser madness. And for Vic, it's now 4 rather than 3.
But I think that the amount of damage that we'll be taking from things in Act 4 will be.
We'll see. And again, I do think, no real spoilers here, but I think this particular book is a little less sanity maddening heavy than book 3 or probably book 5 and 6, but I think we'll have a little respite for a while. Afflictions, using the Unchained rules for these still seems to be working, especially now since we're getting to the levels where they're getting easier and easier to take care of. I like the way the crunch works, and it seems like we've cleared the point of a character being debilitated for months of our real lives. I'm looking at Johnny. Everybody still cool with that?
Yeah.
Action points. I can't claw those out of your hands, can I?
No.
Here's what I always say about any of that stuff is this is supposed to be like a horror fantastical game. So the more that you want us to lean into the horror element of these characters going down a road that they will not survive, sure.
And I would say, if you ever find yourselves feeling like, because I have all these action points, I'm no longer terrified of the things we're fighting, then I think we talk. But it still seems like you have enough fights where you're like, I don't even think the action points are going to pull me through this. As long as we're still living in that place, I'm cool with them.
I am still living in that place.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there are very few fights where I have no worries.
Except for the ones, right, where I think I'm not supposed to have any worries.
The pirate
Yeah.
fight.
Right,
When
right.
we had the pirate fight where it was like, that was just fun to have and be like, okay, no one's going to lose their mind over this.
Yeah.
No one's going to have their soul drained out of their body. This is just going to be like a fun pirate fight.
I'm going to bash some things up.
I have other games where I end a level with leftover action points.
Right.
That will never happen in this campaign.
The only time Dabwick's been close to death, which has happened a number of times, is because they've been straight up clobbered.
Yeah.
So it's nothing that an action point could even save them from.
Right.
I gotta keep those action points.
Skill unlocks. I was a little worried when Johnny proposed that we give you one for free back at 5th level, that I was a little worried it might start to feel a little cheesy by this point, but I'm still cool with it. We'll talk when we do the leveling talk about we all get new abilities at level 10 for those skill unlocks, so we can talk about them when they do them. You all still want to keep them as part of the PC. Kate is just like, you're not going to claw anything away from me, Rob.
Take anything away. The book, it's getting harder. It's not getting easier.
It's true. So I have two little areas I want to talk about under the heading of skills. In one instance about being a little more flexible, and the other actually about being a little less flexible.
Oh, let's hear it.
I'll start with that one. So we had a number of skill challenges in Act 3, and in skill challenges, I like to give you really broad freedom to interpret how skills can be used to accomplish longer-term tasks, because it helps us, tell story, reflects character, and it's all part of the gamey part of a skill challenge. But because we did a number of skill challenges in Act 3, listening back, I did feel by the end that I let some of that, hey, skills can be whatever you want them to be, man, vibe bleed in just a little bit too much into the regular game, and I'm really talking about social skills. The game does have very specific skills that some of you have invested heavily in and others have not, that are designed to be used to make NPCs who aren't inclined to do so act in a way that benefits you. And I'm talking primarily about diplomacy and intimidate. And I feel like I did get some of those skills get a little bit watered down in importance by letting other skill checks basically serve the exact function. So I'm always going to be a sucker for fun or clever role-playing and give behind-the-screen rewards. I'm always going to be open to using another skill to aid somebody else's social skill. But if you're straight up trying to make someone who does not want to do something they do not want to do, and you're trying to use words to do so, and a check is called for, let's lean on using those social skills. Cool?
You got it.
Great. The second thing I want to talk about is knowledge local. Now, I know it's totally ludicrous to get caught up in trying to generate too much air quotes reality in our little fantasy game here, but as we head into what is a totally new city in a totally new country that three of your characters have only ever briefly passed through once many, many years ago. So, this is total hypothetical. The idea that Vic could roll a knowledge local check and easily rattle off the names of a bunch of people who work in some random city government office, while Dabwick, who's lived their entire life here, would have to shrug their shoulders and go, gosh, I don't know. I want to find a way to address a little bit of that. And as the campaign, probably not a spoiler at this point, but as the campaign takes us further and further away from where we came from and into more and more foreign locations, I want to try to set up some ground rules on, or at least some ideas on how we approach that skill moving forward.
Yeah.
So here's my thoughts. There's basically three layers here. The first layer is when it comes to creature knowledge, in other words, identifying the type of humanoid creature that you're dealing with, that will be unaffected by location. If you know about catfolk, you know about catfolk, or because of the way your brain works, you can look at them and you can analyze their behavior and you can eyeball oh, look at those haunches. I bet they can, move extra fast when they charge or whatever. So that'll remain untouched. The second layer is knowledge that feels like it could or would reasonably spread outside of a locality. I think you should be able to make knowledge local checks on it. But if it would make no sense that the information would ever travel beyond the boundaries of a city or country, maybe not. And this is totally open to interpretation, but I've been doing this already, and it feels like for the most part I haven't been getting pushback. The main example I can come up with is when we were doing the Senator Domain stuff, at a few points, Johnny, you were like, I'd like to make a knowledge local check. And when you asked to make one on Domain, I was like, yeah, I can see why you might know the name.
He's a famous senator.
Yeah.
I might have heard of him.
But when you asked to make a check on Nuri, one of his random employees, I was like,
no, you
I don't know. And you were like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if we're cool with that general philosophy.
Yeah, if it's somebody that would have some fame or some notoriety or some infamy, if they would be, then yeah, that makes sense. But if it's just a nobody in the middle of a city, then I wouldn't know anything about them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is knowledge that feels super hyper local when you are in a place or area you've never been. So I don't, to use this initial example, I don't think Vic should just be able to roll and spout off the names of these random employees, but I do think that his training in knowledge local should be useful. So here's kind of what I'm thinking. If you're somewhere that you've never really been and you need to find out information about something or someone, you need to find that information. You need to do some research. So the diplomacy skill already has an existing mechanic that makes a ton of sense to me. You can use diplomacy essentially to canvas for a piece of information, but it takes time, 1d4 hours. And you're basically limited by what the common folk in the area could conceivably know. So there's a ceiling. There's a broad base of the kinds of information you can dig up, but a limited ceiling. And my thought about knowledge local is that we use it similarly, but instead of thinking it as simple canvassing, it's about a whole gamut of investigation, talking to people, following people, recognizing signs and patterns, maybe reading some things, whatever. It'll take time, again, 1 to 4 hours, but you're making a different check, one that, like, say, you might be more trained in Johnny than Katie is trained in local. She's obviously trained in diplomacy, but the ceiling is higher. And the more time you spend doing this, the closer you would get to being able to just, snap your fingers and know who works in that little government office. You've talked to enough people, you've cataloged enough information, You've already picked it up. So my idea is, like, once you've spent, let's say, 10 hours using knowledge local to investigate in a new location, we can kind of flip the rules back to, like, oh, yeah, just make a check. Maybe you've already picked it up, but it'll take a little investment in time.
It's like a mini research project.
Yeah, that's exactly how I'm thinking.
That makes total sense. Like, get to know the city.
Yes.
Get to know the local landscape before you can then have knowledge of the local landscape.
So my thought about Dabwick is, I had to come up with a way to make their life full of experiences in Casimir be mechanically useful in the information and checks department. And since Polly had already spent skill ranks in Profession Radar to help tell the story that Dabs had a job and a life and was entangled in the community their whole life, I decided to make up a little crunch about that. Obviously, there will be just some things that Dab would know, and I won't make you, Paul, make rolls on that stuff. But if there's ever a question mark, or we really want to have the dice help tell the story, like, did Dabs ever pick that up? I've got a system for Paul to roll Profession Radar instead of knowledge local when it comes to that stuff. So without telling Paul why I was doing this, I gave him a list of 20 industries/communities that can be found in Casimir and told him to spend 20 points, Katie, to indicate how well Dabwick knew the people and goings-on in those communities. And I gave him a list of the 7 districts of the city and asked him to rank in order which ones Dabwick knows best, from, like, I know it like the back of my hand, to, I pass through there every once in a while. And based on how Polly made those choices for story reasons, I've now got a specific list of bonuses or penalties I can apply on rolls when you decide you might want to make a Profession Radar check to emulate a knowledge local check.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Love that.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love everything about that. That's awesome.
If it's related to a district, Dabwick has a range from +5 down to something in the -1 on those checks, just based on whether they know it or not. And then the industries, you want to talk a little bit about the philosophy of how you allocated your points?
Well, I approached it kind of like thinking of Dabwick's alignment and the kind of people that Dabwick would have daily interaction with. So Dabwick's not going to know too much about the black market in Casimir, for example. That's not something that Dabwick dabbles in, but might have a little bit of knowledge as to where businesses are located, where to find the right this or that.
Yeah, and so Paul could have made a choice that would have resulted in 4 industries having +5 on all checks related to it, but instead, Paul was like, Dabs has got their fingers in, like, they know a lot of different industries. A lot of people need pest control.
Dabwick wants to understand stuff, so I feel like they're reaching into lower and middle class circles quite a lot.
So it's a whole bunch of lower little bonuses, but bonuses to way more industries than perhaps somebody who only simply goes back and forth to one job and intersects with nobody else.
Right.
Love
Cool.
that. That's so cool.
Awesome. So I did it last book. I'm going to do this book. Before we start playing book 4, predictions on what's going to happen, where you're going to go, what the arc's going to be, where will you be at the end of this book, either geographically or plot-wise. I want you to know, back when we finished recording Act 3, I actually did one of these myself that you can hear in a year, whenever we finish this, of what I thought was going to happen. But yeah, what are your predictions? What do you think? What do you think's going to happen?
I don't know, but I hope we find Sam.
I think we might wind up in... It's the name of that city.
Neruzivan, Carcosa?
Okay, no?
Blossoming
Okano?
Okano. I think we will wind up in Okano.
Okay.
I think that's a later book.
I think Neruzivan is a later book.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It's interesting that this is your thing, because literally going back and listening to everything, I was like, oh, it feels like we have a decision point to either sit here and go, okay, we want to go after Mun and the Necronomicon. We want to try to get some sort of teleport thing and literally just try to catch up to Lols
In time.
in time, because we don't know what's happened already. Or we want to go after the prisoner. Like, it feels like those are the three sort of places of like where we could choose to go. So depending on what of those three things we chose to do, then that would be, but which one we're going to choose to do, I have zero idea.
I love that you have enough clarity to lay out right now before we start playing at least 3 choices, which is a feeling like I feel like the last 2 books have started with I don't even know enough yet to even guess what we could choose to do. Like, I like that we're far enough along that you're like, those are 3 very, they sound to me like very viable options.
And if there's a 4th or 5th choice that someone else sees that's like a very obvious one, please speak up, because I'm always open to other choices and stuff. I love choices.
I think Mun is going to end up being one of the most despicable, depraved creatures that we've met yet
He
so
already
far.
is.
Yeah.
Oh, I am totally...
You don't think I'm going to try to soften him?
No.
Going to make us feel guilty
I
about
think you're
fighting
going to
him.
try to soften him.
What about
Oh,
his
he just
children?
adopted a puppy.
Are you going to kill this
He's going back to school.
He's going to university.
There was a throwaway line from, I think it was the end of Act 2 of Mun talking about either Twain or Altheel being, they're not going to be satisfied with the skin suit.
Yeah.
And so I think there's going to be a whole thing of like Darrow or other creatures that are hidden in these skin suits to look like regular people or maybe children or something else. I don't know.
That is fun. Have I ever included a throwaway line?
Almost never.
Almost never.
They almost always come back to bite us.
Somehow.
Or if we mention
Or
them
like
as
an
a
axe
throwaway
to the
line,
face.
Right.
you go, oh, well that would never happen. But then you're like, oh well, now I'm gonna
make it happen. Yes.
Right.
I totally can't wait to actually have the actual meeting with Lols to see what this shard of him is like.
Yeah.
And also what...
Do you think that happens this book?
I don't know. Okay. I think it happens this book if we make it happen this book.
Got it.
I mean, I think we're at the level where if we decide that's what we want to do, then we can...
We are sure at that level, aren't we?
We can push our way into making that happen regardless of what the story is.
Let's just skip book 4.
Yeah,
We've done it before.
Let's just jump right to book 5.
Yeah.
I will say, in the past, I've referenced I'm scared about Johnny skipping a book. This is that book. So we'll see what happens.
You're like, does Johnny want to play in the city of Casimir? Can he convince everyone else we should leave Casimir? Or is the fact that we have a character whose literally home base is Casimir enough to keep us here?
With friends imprisoned inside
Has
Mun's
a
home.
history of going off on his own.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. All right, we will see you all in Act 4. Act 4. Act 4, y'all.
I'm so happy to be here with you all. I've missed you all so much, and I'm just so happy to be here.
Dark Nexus is produced by Plug and Hum Productions. This podcast uses trademarks and/or copyrights owned by Paizo Incorporated, used under Paizo's fan content policy. This podcast is not published, endorsed, or specifically approved by Paizo. For more information about Paizo Inc. and Paizo products, please visit paizo.com. That's Paizo.com. Dark Nexus uses music and soundscapes by Syrinscape. Check them out at Syrinscape.com. That's Syrinscape.com. Opening and closing themes, along with additional music composed by Rob Kauzlaric. Artwork for Dark Nexus is by Matt Wahlquist. And thanks to DMCP, Richard and Ari, Paul and Shannon, Scotty, Jason, Jess, Joe, Chelsea, Matt, Dave, Derek, Darren, Michaela, J.H., the Biscuit Buddies, and everyone we've gamed with over the years for all the memories and inspiration.
I wish we had a robot.
A robot?
Honest
I'm
to
standing right
goodness
here.
Robot?
Pumpkin.
Pumpkin.
Pumpkin?
Pumpkin.
tick, 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 tick.